Guys, happy Friday. Today we're going to talk to you how to take those maybe challenging listings to sell. We're going to sexy them up a little bit for you. Stay tuned.
You better get fired up.
Happy Friday, brother. How's life?
Hey, I'm good. Things are great.
You are good. You are good. So you're telling me you're renovating your office. What are you guys doing?
Just fancying it up a little bit. I feel like I needed to do something to spruce it up. New year coming up, new Nate coming up. So
I love it, man. It's nice to always have something new, something exciting to go after. So good for you, brother. That's awesome. So today we're talking about in a market when you're seeing, at least in Port St. Lucie, you're seeing maybe up to 500 grand is still a pretty decent market. It's getting away from a seller's market into a neutral market, but it's still a decent market. But man, when you're looking at 500,000 plus, you're looking at a year's plus of inventory. So anything we can do right now from a sales perspective to get that listing sold, we want to do. So we brought Nate in, the local financing expert, and he's going to give us some great financing tips that we as sellers and listing agents can implement to get our listings sold quicker. So Nate, start it off, man. What kind of ideas you got for us?
Sure. So when we have a home that's been sitting on the market for an extended period of time, whatever that looks like, I know just from experience, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Real Estate Agent, that it makes sense to possibly do a price drop because that puts it back on the hot sheet. It goes back to the list for the other agents to see, and it just makes it pop a little bit more. But there's alternatives to doing that I think take things even further. If you drop $10,000 off the purchase price as an example, and we'll just use $10,000 for the example that we're going to go through today, you are essentially lowering your commission, you're lowering the sale of the property, but you're lowering the purchase price for the buyer just fractionally, not very much. For that same $10,000 price drop that you might consider, there's two things that you could look at as a seller that make it even more attractive. And that is a permanent rate buy down, a temporary rate buy down. And both of those things have way more feet on it than just a $10,000 price drop. And I have some examples to go over to explain it to you.
Let's do it, man. You know I'm a numbers nerd.
Yes. So let's talk about a 2-1 buy down. That essentially means that as the seller, you are prepaying interest for the buyer for a 2-year period. It starts with a 2% drop. So let's say that the offered rate is 7.5 for the purposes of our conversation today.
Yep.
I'm Mr. Buyer. I'm approved. I'm qualified. I'm locked in at 7.5. But for the first year, the first 12 payments, I'm only going to pay 5.5. It's 2% below my qualified rate. And you as the seller are going to prepay that interest for me. Sounds scary, but let's talk about the numbers. In year 2, it jumps up 1%. So instead of 5.5%, it goes to 6.5%. And you, as the seller, are going to prepay that interest for me. Sounds scary, but let's look at the numbers. So for a 2-year, let's take a step back. For a $400,000 purchase price, let's say that this is a first-time home buyer. They qualify for the minimum 3% down. So their down payment's going to be $12,000, and they're financing $388,000. That's out of the gate. Now, you can lower the price $10,000. Doesn't really move the needle for me as the buyer very much. But as we talked about, doing the 2-1 buy down, you can for only $92.52, which is 2.3%. So it's not even a full 3% seller concession. It's 2.3%. Essentially prepay my interest for that 2-year period, which is much better for me as the buyer because I'm going to save over that period of time $510 the first year every single month.
Yep.
And $261 for the I'm saving $510. Year 2, I'm saving $261. And you as the seller, you came out paying only $92.52 total, which is only 2.3% of the $400,000 purchase price.
Yeah, and really what that does for you is you got to look at what the alternative is, right? The alternative is I'm not selling, or I'm dropping the price 10, 15, $20,000. If you can drop the price, I think what you said was 92, but it was less than 10 grand. If you can drop the price a little bit less and you can grab that pool of buyers who says the rates concern me, right? Alleviate the rate problem. They're not complaining necessarily about prices, or maybe prices aren't as big a concern. They're fine with the price. They're going to buy a home anyway. But man, these rates are the problem. If you, as like one of very few sellers offering this, can be the solution to that short-term rate issue, man, does that make people feel comfortable. And who knows, in a year or two, rates may come down and you may, as a buyer, be able to refinance that loan and get into something lower. But while you were waiting for that, the seller beautifully made your payment less by reducing your rate. So I think that's a beautiful option. Guys, if you've got any questions, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, please enter them in while Nate's talking. He'll be more than happy to go over any questions or scenarios that you're thinking about. Nate, talk to us a little bit about a permanent rate change. What is it, and what do the numbers look like? How do they differ?
Right. So in a temporary rate buy down, there's a 2-1 step up. You go 2% less, 1% less. Now I'm at my full rate. With a permanent rate buy down, from day one, we're paying a little bit up front to bring that rate down permanently from a higher point to a lower point. So I did a little bit of math. So let's say that we're still talking about a $10,000 concession, just so that we're keeping it apples and apples. You were going to price drop 10,000. Joe Rosen steps up and says, hey, instead of doing a $10,000 price drop, let's just say we're going to offer $10,000 as a concession. We already know from our previous example that that's still less than the 3% that somebody might come to you with. So let's talk $10,000 concession versus $10,000 price drop. That would actually decrease the rate in the scenario that I ran by 1.135%. So that saves somebody interest rate permanently 1.135%. And that translates to a $300 decrease for that mortgage payment permanently for the buyer.
Yep. Yeah, and I would say that's probably going to fit someone who, compared to the 2-1 buy down, it's going to fit someone who is thinking, I'm going to stay in this house for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years or longer.
Exactly.
And they are maybe more numbers conscious and aware than some other folks. I think that would be a more alluring situation. And I love that you're putting numbers to this, because so many people know that this is a thing, but they don't know, okay, for $10,000, what am I going to get? What am I going to be able to offer as a buyer if I'm asking for it? What does that mean to my payment? So I love that you're putting numbers to that. So we got the 2-1 buy down. We got a permanent buy down. Is there anything else that you would use to entice a potential buyer as a seller?
Well, there's the standard seller concessions. You can just throw it out as a seller concession. And then as a buyer, if I don't want to do the rate buy down, I'm okay with my 7.5 in the example that we used. That payment's fine with me, Joe. I don't worry about that. I'm going to take your $10,000 concession and I'm going to apply that toward my closing costs. So I'm keeping $10,000 in my pocket for me to spend on whatever I want.
Yeah.
If I want to do some home improvements, I've got $10,000. If I want to recarpet the floor or refloor the floor, I've got $10,000. If I want to buy some furniture, I've got $10,000.
Yep.
If I want to replace all the appliances, I have $10,000. So there's alternatives to that as well. And again, $10,000, just as the example that we were using, if you were going to do a $10,000 price drop, those numbers can move around if you want to do a $25,000 price drop. But we're just saying $10,000 because that seems small, and it's completely under the 3% max that a seller would be able to contribute to a buyer. So these are just all creative ways to offer less than the 3% down, save yourself the $10,000 price drop, and then just attract buyers because you're putting this out there.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why I know that works, because new construction offers it all the time. You see people all the time looking at house 1, 2, 3, and then all of a sudden they say, oh my gosh, Joe, I found this house. It's new construction. They're going to pay for my closing costs. I'd like to do it. And it's not even necessarily the best home. It's not necessarily the best priced home, but it solves the problem of cash out of the pocket for the buyer. So many sellers and even listing agents think price. We got to be the best price. Price is important, but for some people, they have no problem paying 10, 15, 20 grand more if it means they're working with somebody who will cover some of their closing costs and the amount of cash out of pocket is cut in half, right? So you got to think of it from a standpoint of what problem am I solving for that potential buyer? And not every realtor is educated. How do I educate the realtor politely, respectfully in the remarks so that they see what we're trying to do and they can therefore pitch it to their buyers? So I like to put things like that in the buyer's remarks, the public remarks, so that they see it. It entices them to ask their buyer's agent about it.
Sure.
And I'll put the actual breakdown of math in the broker's remarks or in a separate document. So if we've got a newer agent or someone who just hasn't been exposed or trained on this, now they can see how it breaks down. I will not brand that with all my Rosen or EXP logos. I'm going to leave it blank so they're enticed as an agent to actually print that off and share it with their clients. And that is something I've seen so many times get the deal done. So
Yeah.
I think what you're really doing, Nate, is you're providing solutions for people with different problems. If their problem is the short-term rate and they think rates will come down, but they don't want to wait a year or two, a 2-1 buy down is great for them. If you're looking at somebody who is going to be there long-term and they don't know if rates are going to come back down, then do a long-term rate buy down, right? And if that's someone who is concerned about closing costs, but they're not so concerned about price, then absolutely agree to cover a certain amount of their closing costs, right? So all of these things are phenomenal ideas. And don't forget, guys, when you're offering as a seller or a listing agent, when you're offering that, let's just say it's a $10,000 credit, it really doesn't matter. There's small asterisks to this, but it's pretty minor. It really doesn't matter if they're using it to redo the floors, if they're using it to reduce their closing costs, or if they're using it to do a rate buy down. To the seller, it really doesn't have a huge impact on you. So when you offer that, you can even put the verbiage in there. Hey, we're using this to do your rate buy down. Here's how much it would impact you and blah, 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 based on today's numbers. But feel free to use it for this, this, or this as well, if that's what you need. Now
Right.
you're really opening the door to increase the amount of problems that a buyer could have that you're solving. So, Nate, those are phenomenal ideas, man. And that's one of the reasons we use you, is because you think outside the box. You're always trying to think of another way to get something done. And I'll tell you, every single buyer hits a snag. They've got a challenge or something unique about themselves, whether it's credit or the way they're paid or the amount they're paid or the debt they have. And you consistently come up with outside of the box solutions for them. So I appreciate you consistently delivering value, my man.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, guys, if you have any questions or you're thinking about unique ways to get your property sold, reach out to me or Nate at any time. We're more than happy to help you. And if you're looking as a buyer to get into that new property, you can start with Nate or myself. And we can either start by looking at homes, or we can start with Nate and run the numbers first. Personally, even though I'm the realtor, I think starting with the numbers first is the way to go, because then you've got a straight path for what it is you're looking to do. But Nate is more than happy to help you. You can find him on Facebook. You can find him on Instagram, and he's always accessible. So again, Nate, I appreciate you joining me, my friend.
Of course. It's my pleasure.
All right. Have a wonderful weekend, guys. Thanks for joining us.